All right, we should be good to go. Um, so just to like get things rolling, let's start with introductions. We're gonna do name, pronouns, and then an icebreaker, which we actually pulled from the Year of the Tiger official discussion guide, which was written by Sandy Ho, who's another person who's very like prevalent in the disability justice movement. And she's a close friend of Alice Wong and like compiled this like really great list of like discussion questions. But one of the ones that we thought would be like good to start out today was, what's the soundtrack for the days when your body needs to slow the fuck down? So um I'll go first. My name is Morgan Kovis. I use she, her pronouns. And I feel like when I need like, I'm having like a chill day, I need to slow down. I usually listen to like country music or like folk music, something like just slow and like grounding. I feel like that is always good for me. I'm gonna, and then also you have to call on the next person who's gonna introduce themselves. So I'm gonna go Bryn because you're next on my screen.
Okay, hello. This is actually Bryn and May today. So my name is Bryn and I use he and they pronouns. And for playlist, I think the important distinction here is whether or not I also am planning on crying that day. And if I am, then it's definitely Big Thief. And if I'm not, then I listen to like old-timey like Billie Holiday or like Etta James, stuff like that. Yeah. And then I'm calling on May.
Hi, I'm May. I use she, they pronouns, and I'm gonna have to go with an album and an artist. I really like the album Buds by Ovlov. That is a great album for when I am just chillaxing. And then also anything Alex G, because Alex G is awesome.
Very true.
I'm gonna pick on Ellen.
Hey, I'm Ellen. I use they, she pronouns. And I just was thinking of it. Oh, probably Faye Webster is like my go-to. Like I'll just listen to her all day if I need to relax. Yeah, Faye Webster. I'm gonna call. Oh, can you not hear me that well? Okay, never mind. Ben.
Hi, I'm Finn. I use they and he pronouns, and I'd say when I need to chill out, I listen to I listen to Mitski, but like especially like Bury Me by Makeout Creek, I would say. And I will call on Amy Sun.
Hi, I'm Amy. I use she, her pronouns. And when I have a slow day, I really like Faye Webster too, but also Mazzy Star and or jazz, slow jazz music. And I will call on Stephanie.
Hi everyone, I'm Stephanie. I use she, they pronouns, and I think that when I want to have like a chill day, I'm gonna copy May and go with an album. I listened to the If I Were a Carpenter album that has like all the Carpenters like covers, like slow. I don't know, they're like pretty. Most of them are pretty slow, and I like the Carpenters and I like covers of them, so that helps me chill out. And I think I'm going to call on my friend Douglas.
Hey everyone, my name is Douglas. I use he, him pronouns. And um when I want a chill day, uh when I want a chill day, I think I'll probably listen to Take Me Apart by Kalela, the album.
Do you want to call on someone?
I realize I have to call somebody. I will call on Nia if she hasn't gone yet.
Hi guys, I'm Nia. I use she, her pronouns. And when I need to chill out, I click shuffle play on my country playlist. I'm gonna call on Nicole.
Hi, I'm also with Charles. I'm Nicole and I use she, they pronouns. And when I want a chill day, I listen to Beach House, like their whole discography, just shuffled. Yeah, I'm gonna call on Charles.
Hi everyone, I'm Charles, he, him pronouns. I like to listen on my chill days, like very upbeat, high intensity, like Euro dance music. Something about it just really chills me out.
Who are you gonna call on?
Oh, let's see. I'll popcorn to D.
Okay, on my chill days, hi, I'm D, they, she. On my chill days, I would choose When the Pond by Fiona Apple or Sasami's self-titled. And I will pick Beyond, wait, no, I forget. They're not participating. Who hasn't gone?
No, I'm
Ellen,
here.
have you
I'm
gone?
here.
Oh, okay. Go for it. B.
Thank you. Hi everyone. My name is Bianca. I've been invited by D, so I'm really excited to be here. But my go-to album for when I need to chill is probably Everything by Bunny, and it's spelled BNNY. So hopefully I'm pronouncing that right. But thanks, Steve, for calling on me.
I think that's everyone. What I'm hearing though is that we need to make a playlist, a chill day playlist, because I'm loving these recommendations. I'm going to pass it over to Stephanie to kind of get discussion started.
Okay, so if we're gathered here today to talk about Year of the Tiger, an activist life, there's so many things that can be said about this book that obviously we're very excited to discuss. But the very first thing that like stands out and that I just wanted to ask like your guys' opinion about was just like the structure of this book, like memoir, and what were like your favorite things that were like different that you hadn't seen in like past memoirs. I'll go first. So I don't have a cat, but I do enjoy them, as you can see. So I really liked all like the references and like how she made her own little like tagline that she like continuously like referenced, specifically in the parts where she was talking about like food and talking about like her struggles with like literally not knowing if every time she eats she's going to choke on her food, and talking about like, oh, when I'm nervous I take like little dainty like kitten like licks, or when I'm feeling like extra angry or like angsty I do big cat like bites, or just like stuff like that. I thought was really a great way to like describe things and like reference back to them. So what did everyone else like?
I love like all the different forms of media that were in it. I love reading interviews. Listening to them is like awesome also, but reading them is just so much fun. It makes the book flow like so nicely. So I thought that was really cool. And also the recipes included were awesome. I just felt like all the different forms of media also helped you build like a really comprehensive portrait of kind of who she is and like all of her different interests and the ways that she interacts with other people. Like you could see that through the different kinds of like stories that she was telling and like the different kinds of media. But yeah. Does anyone else have any thoughts?
I thought that it was cool. I don't think I've ever read a book like this style before. Granted, I listened to it on audiobook. I'm honestly not sure if it was my favorite. It was a little bit hard to like follow along at points. Especially the interviews. I think that's because I was listening to them. It was kind of hard to tell who was speaking, but that was definitely just because I listened to the audiobook. But I did think it was interesting and also to see all of the collections. But I think personally I prefer more of like it like flowing more.
I have a question for you since you just said that you listened to the audiobook. Did they like mention that there was pictures or like try to like describe the pictures as you were reading it?
Yes, they did. They did that. They talked about the PDF download. Now, granted, I didn't look at it because I was mainly listening to this at work. But they mentioned they were like, in your PDF download, you will see this picture, and then they described the picture. So I honestly felt like I didn't really need to look at it because they described it pretty well. So it was nice. Very solid audiobook.
Yeah, I really liked the way it was structured. I thought at points it got a little bit like repetitive in terms of like what it was saying, but I thought overall it was a really good book. And something especially that I liked about how it was structured were like how there were little like comics or pictures that split up some of the chapters. And those were like some of my favorite parts of the book, especially yeah, like and they were just like really fun, kind of cool break from all of the text. And so yeah, that's just what I wanted to say.
I thought the structure of it was very interesting also, kind of both of those things together. It was like, it was nice with how kind of like short the chapters were and then being broken up like that, but it brought out kind of for me like my style of reading definitely changes depending on like what kind of reading it is. So switching back and forth like that was interesting, but it made the story like someone mentioned like it helped me see who she is as a person better than I think just like a constant style of writing does usually.
Yeah, I think that Alice's like personality like shone through like so much throughout the book, which was so like nice. It felt like reading like just like talking to a friend for like 350 pages. Like she just went so I love how she like broke up the different like sections. Like I think it was origins, activism, culture. Like she really like touched all of those areas, and um it truly like is just like a compilation of like all of her work and like all of her like ideas in a really engaging like diverse way. Like it used a lot of like different types of, yeah, I think everybody like mentioned that, but like I loved her using like the podcast transcripts and like talking about like interviews, and then yeah, like the pictures were just great too. Like yeah, it was cool, but just like seeing her personality, I think like it was really just I don't know her personally, but like it felt like just so her to like this was like her, yeah, in a book, which makes sense.
I agree with you. I also like that she kind of included like past published pieces that she had, like past articles that she wrote, or like work that she had done at different points in her life too. Because it was also interesting to see the way that she presented herself at different points in her life, and also in different like forms of media. Because I think that Finn mentioned this and May mentioned this to me as well, but like I felt like the book was repetitive at some points, but I thought that was kind of interesting sometimes to see like things that she did consistently mention in different published pieces, like in articles, stuff that she would consistently talk about. I felt like you could really hear what like was most important to her and was like affecting her the most in her life. And also I think that's just cool. I felt like I really got like a really good like picture of her, like we've said, but I feel like in a lot of like autobiographies, people will mainly just write straight out and maybe talk about past works, but they won't just include them in there, and I thought that was cool.
Yeah, I feel like her style of writing kind of allowed it to be way more intimate. Like when you're reading about, like when you're reading someone write about themselves, like it's intimate already, but adding like graphics and like reiterating certain things that were important to you, like I don't know, I think we're pretty lucky to like be this intimate with her in this book. That's how I see it, I think.
I think it's really interesting, like the way that she formatted it too, because we got to see like where the information was going. Like this article was in this magazine for this reason, or she like wrote this letter to this person. And it was really interesting to see how she phrased and like how she wrote about different ideas for like different settings, different audiences and contexts. And then to see them all together, kind of like it really kind of helped to like understand the way that she writes, and also like as an activist how she was speaking about a lot of the ideas. I don't know, it was just interesting to see them in like all different formats. So if it was like the same idea, I'm like, okay, she's saying it this way to this person for this reason versus this way to this person for this reason, which was like awesome.
Going along with that, and also with what Brenda and Finn were saying about like the repetitiveness, I thought that was also really interesting and something that I was noticing too while reading. But when I thought more about it, I was like thinking just about the title and how it said like an activist's life. Um, it it really shows how she has dedicated her whole life to fighting for the same things again and again, like starting as an activist from like literally being like a high schooler and like sending like requests to like the New York Times to like I'm not sure how old she is right now. Is she like in her 50s from what I have seen? Or oh, 48. Okay. But yeah, that's like a whole life's work of like asking for the same accommodations that aren't being like listened or actually like given, because like it is seen as like a burden to like do that for like disabled individuals.
I think a big part of the thing that I enjoyed too is like the transparency, and because of that, like I felt like increased visibility for certain issues and the way that she was dealing with certain issues and like the accommodations. Like I just thought reading it's like towards the end, and they're all throughout the book, but I just read the one where she like wrote a letter to XYZ like board of local government for whatever. But it's just to see how she says that and like writes this letter to government officials versus her explaining it to us like in a more personal format. I feel like being able to see both sides was awesome in terms of just like conceptualizing the issues and thinking about them and thinking about how they might affect like people that we know or the disabled community in general. And I think visibility is also like a huge theme, and it comes up a lot in the discussion questions. But yeah, I thought that was awesome, and she did that really, really well.
Okay, something else that I noticed was like a really big theme throughout the book was just I know I mentioned like the liking like the cat part before, but anger and like different ways that like anger were portrayed throughout the book. Um it's like something I've been thinking about a lot recently, and like I've just like been having conversations with different friends about like the ways that anger manifests and how that looks different for someone, for example, like Alice Wong, who like is an activist and knows that not everyone is going to have like the same framework or like lived experiences that is like fueling her anger. So I don't know, I just wanted to hear about your guys's experience with like anger in relation to like parts of your identity or things that you're like really passionate about, and ways that like you felt that be like seen or like heard like in this book, or just like her anger in general too.
I was gonna say for me at least, like I thought the way that she portrayed anger was really inspiring because as a female, and I'm sure like a lot of people can relate in like different ways, like you're kind of taught that anger isn't a tool that you should utilize. It's maybe something you should try to like tamp down a little more depending on the situation, or at least like I'm someone who has in the past been a people pleaser in the way that like anger is always something that should be suppressed. But I really liked how like Alice talked about it as like an important tool that she uses for activism and something that fuels her activism. And it's like just another emotion. It's not necessarily anything stigmatized, but like I really liked how she portrayed that. And then in terms like of my personal experience, I have a little brother who's disabled in a lot of the same ways that she is, but he's mentally handicapped just a lot more. And as an Asian American also, I learned so much about even like things I never thought I would see or like read written out. And as someone who has like a disabled sibling, I didn't even think about so many of the things that she talked about, and that inspired me, like coupled with how she talked about anger as a tool to for me to think about the ways in which I can be an activist, like for myself and then for like my family too.
Yeah, I love, love the idea of like anger as like an important tool, if not one of the most important tools for activism and for change. Um I think like the anger like allows us to recognize the parts of our world and like the parts of our lives that are not like suitable for like our own like internal and external worlds. And so I think like similar to like Amy, like anger is something that I've like had a difficult time like reckoning with like just throughout my life. It's just like always been like a difficult emotion, which I think part of that is like totally like socialization and like how we're taught to like deal with anger. But it was like very I think it's just um I think that the way that Alice Wong talks about anger is like very hopeful and optimistic, and like it I think removing that like negative connotation from anger is like really important for like everyone, and then using and like figuring out like how to like use it as almost like a looking glass to see the the things that need fixing, you know. Read Rage becomes her.
I agree with you guys, and honestly, Stephanie, this has also been something that I have been thinking about a lot recently, especially after reading this book. I think it was probably one of like the things that stuck out to me the most reading this book is because like I feel like anger has definitely been stigmatized, and in my own personal life I've definitely noticed that. Like I have had a lot, like, of all my emotions, I feel like anger is the one that I like struggle with the most in like processing it and figuring out what it means and how to not just kind of like try to ignore it, which I feel like is what I've always been told to do. And I think it's really interesting because she talks about having this anger in a way that I feel like she does like kind of like remove the negative connotation from it, and it also like I feel like helps her in her activism and is like inspiring to her. And I don't know, I feel like for me I still struggle a lot with having like a lot of anger, and like the areas in my life that I feel like I get most angry about are the ones that I feel like are like the like maybe issues that would like kind of fall under activism. Like for me, I'm in aviation and I'm also transgender, and there are a lot of like legal and social and political barriers in place for that I still don't really know what to do about, and make me very angry. But I also like I feel like it's kind of like maybe it's I don't know. I feel like for me it's difficult because I don't really want to just be angry all the time, but I also don't want to ignore my anger with those issues. So I felt like this book was interesting because I feel like she does a very good job of that.
Thank you for sharing that, Bryn. That is very true. I also have like dealt with anger a lot, and it was like really heightened when I came to like OSU and was like a student at a PWI, and my freshman year roommate Nia and she's right here, guys, would talk about it a lot, and just like how we like dealt with our anger, like managing the situation. And I've like seen how my anger has like evolved. I'm a senior now, so it definitely has like changed, and there's been times where there's like almost guilt associated with anger. But again, Bryn, what you were saying, I also did like a vibe check with myself, because I was like, damn, I'm angry all the time. Why am I so angry? And every single thing that made me angry had to do with like what you said, like an activist umbrella. And then I like stopped and I was like, why should I feel guilty if it's like my values? Like the reason I'm so passionate and like angry about it is because it like is something that I value very closely, which is like respecting people and like caring about people. So of course I'm gonna have like a reaction to that. But it does like wear you down, I feel, at times, which is why I have a quote from the intro of the book that I wanted to share. So she talks about how activism is undervalued, unsustainable, and unrelenting. And then she goes a bit into like why. And then she says, finding the joy, pleasure, and generative possibilities of organizing is part of my long-term unlearning of what activism is supposed to look like. Unlearning and building anew is activism as well. So that part I like highlighted like so much because I was like, damn, I need to reference that so like often, because I would like consider myself like a lifelong activist. Like I do care about like learning about things and like helping people. But I also want to take care of myself at the same time. And a big part of that is just seeing the ways that I can channel positive emotions into activism and like the change I can make. But alongside with that, she says, just talking about like how this the book is going to be formatted, she says, my redacted texts, rage, and callouts are my truths as much as my activism and storytelling. Circling back to guilt, I feel like every once in a while, when I catch, for like me personally, when I catch myself feeling angry and like going in circles about it, I feel kind of like immature and like silly. I'm like, okay, I'm feeling angry, and angry is like an immature emotion. But I really like that quote because I think it is just as like strong and useful and productive as like any other emotion. depending on like what other steps you take like after that. So yeah, that was something I found helpful.
That is very good. I really like all of that.
One thing kind of going along with this and how we were saying like rage is something, like anger is something that women shouldn't have or shouldn't do or anything like that. I was thinking about how like women are also always supposed to be selfless and like do everything for other people, and like we're seen as, you know, like monsters when we live our lives for ourselves. And that was one thing I just loved about Alice and her attitude towards life, and like everything was, she was like, I'm not doing anything that doesn't serve me in like a lot of ways. And I just loved that in the form of, I don't know, all the different things she referenced a lot of just saying like, I'm not going to feel bad for it. Like I'm living my life. And I just love that because I think everyone needs to hear that every once in a while, as much as it's like awesome to do things for others. Obviously, this is our lives and like you have to do things for yourself too.
Kind of off of that, off of what Jade said, I loved like the stories about like her asking for help in like different areas and how that like um informed her activism and kind of like transformed accessibility in like certain spaces. I'm thinking about like the choreography of care like section and how she like talked about how just like leaning on support kind of like transformed the way that like public rate like we thought about like disability representation in like public radio and like news. And she talked about like it's if like and then also I haven't, I need to like look back at it but yeah, I don't know, I think that was really interesting to me and definitely a theme that like carried on in a lot of different sections throughout the book.
Okay, so one thing that I thought was really interesting was approaching this book, like depending on, I feel like okay, let me start again. Within like activism, I feel like there's a hierarchy almost of like who knows the most and who knows every single term and like what it means. And I thought it was really awesome and interesting how this book really just started and didn't really explain anything, but at the same time it did. The main thing I'm thinking of is like intersectionality. It was never like explicitly touched on at all throughout the book. Like you don't get a definition of intersectionality, but you're like, you read the tweets about it, you see like the articles, you see her conversations with like Black individuals and like their perspective, and you see different media representations. And one of the things that fall like under that category that I thought was like very interesting and made me like rethink a lot of things like based on like my own access to like healthcare and all those things was like financial, like class struggles. I thought her essay on like the disabled 1% was very, very interesting, and how different disability looks like for people depending on like their monetary status. And these are like really weird movie references, but guys, don't call me out, but the Joker, it made me think of the Joker because I've seeing like disabled people in movies, I've always seen like, oh, someone's caring for them, or oh, they have like a live-in nurse, or oh, they have all this technology around them that's like helping them. And I'm like, okay, yeah, they have that. It's like super normal. And then we watch a very revolutionary film like The Joker, where he tries to go get he's like talking to like a social worker and is trying to get like medication approved, and literally because he doesn't have money cannot get his medication that he needs. Like ugh, I'm not even defending him, but maybe I am. Yeah, so stuff like that was like really interesting. Talking about like the Denzel Washington and how he was like an able-bodied man and then suddenly found himself being disabled and was had a live-in nurse, had all this technology, had another thing that I thought was interesting that I never caught in like any other media was the live-in nurse doesn't like clock in and clock out. I was like, oh, that's so interesting because I feel like in movies you always see like, oh, they only have like one caregiver, but um yeah, most people are probably dealing with like 2 to 3, and that's just in like 24 hours of their lives because they need like assistance and everything. And that is just not the case for a lot of people. I read Alice Wong's like her like edited book of Disability Visibility, which my friend over here, Douglas, is currently reading. But there was more chapters on that from like different perspectives talking about like financial issues. So I think about like Coda. If any of you guys have like been on like Coda, and first of all, the Coda system in itself is like really hard to navigate, but the accessibility within it is also just like an issue that you don't really like doesn't like come to mind right away. Um
And that's
yeah,
so can
I'm just on a rant at this point, but
can I add
there's
on
a
to
lot.
that's so true because I remember one time I was like at the stoplight on 15th and High. And I was like on this side, kind of like where the Target is, and then on the other side, like where the Wexner is, like where the Coda bus stop is. There was this man like he was like trying to like get on the Coda, but like he was in a wheelchair, and you know they have a little ramp. But if you think about it, if the sidewalks are at an angle and then the ramp itself is at an angle and you're rolling up and you're on wheels and you're rolling back, like that's what happened to this man. And like everybody was just watching him, and it took like 5 minutes for somebody to finally go out and like finally help him. And so it is like interesting when we think about like accessibility for in public spaces, like taking the Coda. And like I've had this conversation with Stephanie about like even Ohio State. I mean, yes, it's great. Ohio State's so big and stuff like that. But then you also have these like distances that like people have to even go up. And then like even dorms or like I think of like places like Morrill, which have like 23 floors and the elevators aren't the best. Um, so yeah, that was just something I thought of too.
I noticed, sorry, just a small thing. I noticed that at OSU as well, especially in the winter, because I had someone in my class, or that's in my major, and so I have a lot of classes with them, and they're in a wheelchair. And when it was snowing outside, like there was snow and ice, like where you know how they shovel and then there's like a giant pile. It was like in front of the ramp, and like I was like, okay, so literally how are they gonna get where they need to go? Like this is insane. So I don't know. I've only noticed that at the social work building, no less. But I don't know if like you guys have noticed other stuff like that on campus, but that was like something that I noticed last winter. But yeah.
Speaking about the buses, so I don't work for Coda, but I do work for cabs, the OSU bus services, and we are supposed to provide services for that. Like all of the people who drive the buses go through training to be able to help people on and off the buses who use wheelchairs and should know how to properly strap the wheelchair in so that it does not move. So that is honestly like what the fuck? Like you literally, that is your actual job. That really upsets me because like you go like, how are you gonna like sit there and watch somebody do that? I just know that if I were in that person's shoes, I would be in tears. Like if I start rolling back, I would be in tears. Like I would not be able to handle that. So that is like, that's really upsetting. And also I have noticed that too with like classes and stuff. Like you said, Nicole, like some buildings, like the building that I take like my language classes in, the elevator broke and they didn't like fix it. They just were like, well, there's stairs. Like, how does that work, guys?
That's how they did that in my dorm building too. Like when I first moved in, I live on the 3rd floor, and I was noticing like the buttons that open the door just because I had like a cart. So I was like, oh, open the door. And there are like, there's one at the front door, and that's like it. And there's no rooms on the 1st floor. So you have to go upstairs. But like you just cannot live there if you have any kind of
That's the
physical
other thing too.
disability.
Like even just with like door stuff too, like my old dorm, I lived in Smith Steve, and like the buttons to open the doors just like broke like halfway through the year and they just did not fix them.
Yeah, they just don't even have
Like
any
what's the procedure, guys? What are we gonna what's the goal here? Or like how, especially like when you cross High Street, the buttons work to cross High Street, but not to cross lane. So how are you supposed to know when the walk side's on to cross lane? Because it only verbalizes it when you're trying to cross high. And lane is equally as busy and horrible.
We have spoken a couple times before, Bryn and I, that like I think you mentioned this with Braiding Sweetgrass, and I mentioned this with Year of the Tiger. It's almost like I feel like these books should be in schools, like some type of way, if possible, or something along the lines, because like I think Alice mentions in the book how like even social policies and government policies that are kind of working backwards. And it's like, as somebody myself who does my best to be considerate of everybody, there are so many ableist tendencies like intertwined into things that I didn't even realize, and like things at Ohio State that I'm sure like a lot of people don't notice.
And also that I feel like a lot of people would care about if it was more popular. Maybe I'm naive in thinking that, or maybe just I'm naive in the fact that like if people cared about it, the idea would be more popular or whatever. But I don't know, it just like made me really angry reading the book, because I was like, so many of these changes, like when she talked about the elevator buttons at, what was it, like one of the UC schools, like stuff like that is literally so easy. Like you have to put buttons in an elevator anyway. So what if you just put buttons in the elevator that everybody could use? Like stuff like that. I feel like so many things like that are like incredibly easy that it's really upsetting that it's not what's happening.
One of the things that my dad like would always like instilled in me since I was like young, so this kind of applies, he's a landscaper, so he's always like moving like different like branches and like all those stuff. He says that whenever you're like in a sidewalk, if there's like branches or just like really like random things like on the sidewalk, to just like take a moment to pick it up and like move it to the side, because it makes like a big difference for, he was mentioning more like elderly people, but it honestly makes a difference for everybody, people with like strollers or like wheelchairs. And something that
like scooters that people will park.
Okay.
Like guys,
yeah, I was gonna say what applies more to us. I feel like if we're walking on campus or literally anywhere and you see someone left like a scooter literally laying straight out on the sidewalk, the people in this room, I'm gonna instill it in you now. Like when you see it, you're gonna be like, oh, let me just flip it over and put it on the grass, because this is like, if someone can't, like what if someone with a wheelchair passes by, like they're literally gonna have to like reach over and like bend it. Like that's so inconsiderate, and something that we can all just like keep in mind. And also another thing we keep in mind, especially I know like most of us are like going back to class and stuff. One of the things I've gotten into like a habit of doing, not only because it helps me as a student, but I also because I feel like it helps other people, is for any like Zoom or recorded lectures, for some professors, they save it in a certain way where there's like no way to have any captions to the like videos, and I always have to have captions like when I'm note taking because I want to like I don't want to like rewind it like so many times. So I've like just been annoying in the past and like emailed them and was like, hey, did you know that the video you sent out, like there's no way to have like captions on it? I feel like that is also something else that like even if we all did like on an individual scale could make a difference for like a class of like 50 people. So that's like one less thing that like someone else has to like advocate for themselves for.
Yeah, I'm thinking about like how one of her, I think it was in when she was talking about like the presidential election, oh like the crypto vote hashtag, and then like the elections. I don't remember if it was, I think it was 2016, but she was like not a single presidential candidate had like accessible websites for like people who were like who needed like audio descriptions and stuff like that. And that was just crazy to me. And like totally goes with like what Bryn was saying, like these are like really, really easy changes that like people can make, but there's literally like a like gap in the information that people in power are like taking in, and like the like it's just it's crazy.
That's true. That was literally crazy. That whole chapter was like insane. But particularly that it's like, okay, how hard is it to make a website accessible when you have like how many thousands of dollars being funneled into like making this website? It's like one check mark that you had to do and you couldn't do it, which is like what? But this kind of circles back to like kind of what something we were saying earlier, but I thought the conversation around like productivity was really interesting and like the way that she talked about it. And I feel like she like connected it to herself when she was like talking about writing towards the end, like her writing process. But also I think the conversation around like productivity in like a capitalist society in terms of like the disabled community and disabled population is very, very interesting. And this book kind of opened my eyes to that a lot more than like anything else ever has. But if anyone else has any thoughts, would love to hear them on
I
that
like
topic
how,
or any topic.
or going off of that, Lauren, I like how she like portrayed all the nuances of like the life of someone who's disabled, and she talked about that I think in the movie like interview, but she was saying how a lot of the times disabled people's like lived experiences are compressed into more of a one-dimensional view, and that's basically like there's not even a binary of like, oh, they have this joy and happiness in their lives, but like, oh, that's so sad, they either are visibly handicapped, like they're in a wheelchair, or like I don't in some other way, and that kind of paints something over like all the other nuances of their like life where they experience like different emotions and happiness and they're angry and sad, but it's not just all about that one facet of like how they exist physically. And so I thought that was like really interesting how she pointed out in media a lot of the representations are like that. And now like I watched like a movie for the first time the other day, and I noticed something like, oh, like there was a disabled person in it who lost both their legs, and I think in the interview she was also saying that the person, and sorry, I'm not being clear, in the book that was disabled was like, oh, I'm disabled and now I want to die, and they had like a caretaker and like a nice home, and they were in the 1% of disabled people, but like just because that one thing changed, they in the movie wanted to die. And she was pointing out that that makes no sense because he's fortunate enough to have all these other great things in his life, and that basically is like the sole representation of disabled people, also including the fact that it's never usually a disabled person who's actually playing the role. It's a able-bodied actor. So that I thought was also very relevant.
The point about like I think she definitely mentioned it like when they were talking about the movies, but like the point about seeing like disabled people as like having joy and like just being like a whole person, it was like so like just such an important like point that I think she brought up in the book. And I think she also mentioned it when she was having a drawing done of her over Zoom from, I can't remember the name of the artist right now, but she talked about how when somebody had like seen the drawing of her, the first thing that they said was like, oh, she looks so sad. And like, because of like the bags under her eyes, or she just looked like she did like wasn't having a great time, but she was like, that wasn't it at all. Like there are so many other parts of me that like were apparent in that. And like I yeah, Riva Lehrer. But that was just I think that like when the artist was also talking about like her perspective of like how she's like been made to feel like because I think that she does, if anybody else is like I know Lauren, you're looking it up right now, but like if you have like the info on her, like let me know, you're welcome to jump in. But I think she did hearing her talk about like how the steps that she takes like make subjects feel comfortable and like seen, I think was like really beautiful too. And I think that is also something that like me as like an able-bodied person could like take like could like continue to like work on and keep in mind, is like how like just seeing and like can be like there are steps to be taken to like make people feel comfortable and like whole and like seen in the way that they want to be seen. But
yeah. Just kind of coming off of what Amy and Morgan were talking about, and I guess it's like a little bit different, but there was a part in this book where she said something that like really hit me, and it kind of, I guess it, to some extent, I think I held this bias, but it was, or not bias, but like I held this as a problematic viewpoint that I just hadn't really challenged. But like she said that able-bodied people often like just assume that disabled people all want to be non-disabled. And I thought like that really hit me, where it's like, oh, like that's a bad viewpoint, like that's not right. And I just tried to challenge my own assumption there. So I just thought I would share that because that was interesting to me.
I think something that this book does really, really well is challenge assumptions like that, but not exactly like outwardly. And she talks about that later. I forget, I was trying to find this for like 10 minutes, but I can't remember what chapter she says. It might be the fuck you pay me chapter, but she's like, I am not here to teach you blank. Like, do not ask me to like lead a seminar about blank, like how to make whatever accessible. Like, that's not my job. But she does it like I mean, I learned a ton reading this book, like just by reading her story and like getting to know her. So it's like, no, she didn't expressly like set out to teach me these things, but I did learn them anyways through like learning about her and learning about her life and all of that. And I feel like the challenging assumptions thing, that there could be like, I mean, like thousands in just this one book that was like not, it wasn't necessarily the purpose, but it happened anyways, which was like awesome.
I also agree with what you said, Lauren, and I know that I know she talked about that later in the book, but she outright says like in her introduction, she's like, this is not like an instructional book. This is not like a guideline to like how to learn about disabled people. And she also says like this is not even like an intersectional guideline or anything like that. Like, and I thought that reading her introduction after like, okay, learning what the book was, I think that I had an expectation that this was going to be more of like an informational book about these topics. And then reading her introduction, I was like, oh, this is like not that at all. And I think that that is honestly interesting to keep in mind when reading it, because I definitely did learn about a lot of assumptions that I had that were just assumptions I hadn't challenged, and also just topics I didn't know that much about. Because if I'm learning so like many things about problems that disabled people face from a book that is not meant to be instructional, I'm wondering how much more that there is probably out there to learn from books that actually are written to be instructional. And I just thought that was interesting, because I definitely would read it and I would be like, for example, the straw thing. Okay, I didn't even know about that. I personally do believe that compostable straws are pretty crap. They don't really work that well. But I also think that I probably had that mindset of just, oh, well, if you need a straw, just bring one. But like, why do like, obviously nobody wants to just have to bring their own personal bag of stuff to literally everywhere they go. Like, if I had to bring a glass or metal or hard plastic straw to every single place that I went, I would 100% forget it at least 50% of the time. Like, I would not be remembering that all the time. Like, I like on a good day remember to bring my phone everywhere. Like, why should I be expecting other people, just because they're disabled, to have to bring a ton of stuff everywhere they go, when it actually is very simple for these places to provide it? So yeah, that was my point.
Towards the end, sorry, Stephanie. Towards the end, I was just gonna say, when she's talking about the ventilators in the pandemic, and she's like, "Am I expendable?" That's like a much more serious topic than straws. But still, I mean, like, it's just and they said it in the interview too. They were like, okay, it wouldn't have been that hard to stockpile ventilators. Like, it would have been literally easy, and it just didn't happen and never happened. And now they can't make a stockpile. So it's just like, okay, there's like nothing they can do, but it was obviously like easily preventable. You know what I mean? So I feel like a lot of the issues that are brought up in terms of like items and things like that, like foresight would be awesome. You know what I mean? Like, who would have thought? I don't know. But yeah.
Yeah, going with what Lauren and Bryn were saying, one of the things that even like she mentions it, she's like, oh, who would have thought that accessibility would benefit everyone? Like, everyone, like, I feel looks at a term or does something like about accessibility, and they're like, oh damn, like it's an afterthought. They're like, oh yeah, I also have to remember that I need to think about some like other people that aren't going to like do this. And one of the parts where like she mentions it is at the UC school. She was talking about how there's like elevator buttons on the door, and when people are coming like inside and they like can't reach to the front or like move there and press those buttons, they added buttons to the side as well. And she's like, every time I go in those elevators, I see able-bodied people also using like the side buttons because it helps everyone. And I feel like everyone can also think of a time when they were like holding a bunch of stuff and like shoved into like the hand, like the like automatic door opener thing. Like, they do really help everyone. And she makes the argument just the same with the straws, saying you shouldn't have to explain any medical diagnoses to try to get a straw, especially to like a stranger. If it was just like equal access, people could like very much like benefit from it. And I think the pandemic really exposed everybody for like just doing things that were very like that have like so much resistance to them, but very easily could have been done to accommodate everyone. So for example, Zoom, they'd be like, yeah, there's like really no way that we can have you come to class. Like if you're not in class, sorry, you're gonna get an F. And then all of a sudden it's like, guys, there's this new thing called Zoom. How about we all just meet on there? We're all gonna learn it together. And now it's such a helpful tool because look at us gathered here today talking about this book on Zoom. And just like so many other things, I think about it all the time. For like as a university student, Ohio State like offers for student disability services. They like allow people to like take like additional time on exams and just like kind of like things that are very helpful in terms of like academics. So it's obvious that these things like can be done. And then the question, like it like begs the question, like why isn't it just not done for everyone? Like wouldn't it be so much more easier if you didn't need, first of all, access to health insurance and like a medical provider to give you a note that says, yes, I validate this person's like diagnoses, or like this person's like blah blah blah, and they can get extra time on an exam. Like if that hurdle was just like removed for everyone, I'm pretty sure like every student could perform better, not have to like go through like all those hoops, and just like so many things are being like revealed in that way. But yeah, accessibility at its core is just like reaching the most amount of people that you can in like a single thing. So like if it is thought of in the very beginning, it eliminates like so many hurdles later on. Like yeah, what Lauren was saying.
I think that my favorite like part of the book was when she was talking about how like things like this, like access is love, and that's like a form of love. And I really liked that because I thought that it made it like really simple and obvious if it wasn't already. And also it made me think of our past book, Braiding Sweetgrass, that is talking a lot about just like having that love and sense of community for like the people around you, and just like kind of just like maintaining a sense of gratitude, and just like, I don't know, just kind of like being more outwardly thinking. And I've been thinking about this a lot after reading that book, and especially like going into the new year, I definitely want to like work on, I would say, I don't know how to like word, like participating in community more, if that makes sense. Because I feel like it's definitely something that we miss here. And we talked about that like last meeting, but just kind of like, I don't know, like being a student at OSU, you're like, you know, you're one person, whether you're coming from Columbus or farther away, you're like moving here to a place that you're kind of unfamiliar with. And I feel like building that sense of community can sometimes be really difficult, and finding ways to participate in it can be hard. But I think that that's something that, first of all, it's hard for everybody. And in this book, we focus on how it's hard for specifically like disabled people. But I think that that's something that like we could all do better to focus on, and also just kind of looking at accessibility as just like a form of love and caring for your neighbor in essence.
I totally agree. Especially like the community building thing reminded me of All About Love. And after reading this, I would be like really curious to reread All About Love and kind of see what connections are there. Because we read that, like that was pretty much like a year ago. So rereading that after reading this, I feel like, especially the chapter, at least the one chapter that's about like community building, with this accessibility in mind. And I don't remember everything that is talked about in that chapter, but I think that that would be really, really interesting and awesome. And also when we were like talking about this book, like just with each other and like with whoever before, we were like, there's so many things to talk about in relation to this book, because it's like it impacts everything. Everything is impacted by it, you know what I mean? It's like it's it's like a required reading kind of, like Bryn was saying earlier, kind of book, because it just, you can tie it to literally anything. But yeah.
Kind of off of the conversations about community and access, one of the things that like has stuck with me the most throughout reading this book is how her like relationship to technology and how that has been like the primary source for like finding community with other like disabled people of color, and then also how that has been like the main source for like her activism. And it yeah, I just wanted to hear like everybody's thoughts about that, because I think that um it's been really like enlightening to see the good ways that like technology and social media can be used for like um, education, for community care, for things like mutual aid, yeah, like stuff like that. Yeah, if anybody has any thoughts.
I can remember being a baby activist and just like learning my first things just about what activism means and what like feminism means, which is also like interesting when you're like a preteen. But what a core memory is being like 14 and like getting Twitter for the first time, and my first retweet was just something that I found like funny. But it said like the account was something like angry feminist cat or something, and it was like, oh, of course I'm gonna get a husband because I need someone to like I'm only gonna get a husband so they can like kill bugs. And I was like, ha ha. And then I remember looking through the comments and like people were like referencing all these like feminist like topics, and from there I just went down a rabbit hole, and for like years after, it just was like follow after follow of like being on Twitter, being on Instagram, like finding out like different websites and like documentaries, and from there like building on and like strengthening like my knowledge of not only like activist like terms and like slang, but also what books I should read, what movies I should watch or podcasts I should listen to. And that definitely like pushed me forward. And there are like people still to this day that I have not met in real life, but I did like talk to or interact with in like those spaces when I was like a teenager, and are a big part of me just like learning about other people and like their experiences. And I reference them like in my mind, like, oh yeah, the very first time I learned that white people do this, or some like really weird like niche thing. Like for example, like Bryn was saying, like being caught off guard by like the straws. I remember reading the straw, like learning about straws for the first time um from like an activist like talk on like Twitter like years ago. And it was like when no one was even mentioning that, and it was like just beginning like the conversation of like straws. um so for me, that's like a place where social media has been a source of like nourishment and like intellectual like curiosity. What about you guys?
I definitely relate to that because I was probably radicalized on Tumblr as a teen, but I'm losing my train of thought. I feel like technology now, like I didn't really think about this before reading the book, but I feel as if like we're lucky to grow up now because we have the privilege of like, even if you grow up in a, I don't know, like for me, for example, like my parents are pretty conservative, and like most people I know who like whose parents have a certain set of beliefs, like usually the kid kind of turns out that way, at least in my experience. And like a lot of my friends didn't really understand how I form different beliefs, and I never really like thought about articulating how like basically like the internet was like the activist space for me to learn about things, because I didn't really have any of that in like real life. And so I turned to the internet when I was like young for that, and I just kind of like you said, fell down a rabbit hole of stuff. But I think it's important to like still continue using it, I guess, as an activist space, because for me at least, like I don't know, I haven't like been in those spaces online for a while, or even on Tumblr obviously for a while. But in real life, I wouldn't say that I'm necessarily in a lot of those like spaces or have a lot of interactions with people who are activists in real life. And so I think that was like discouraging to me, because I definitely like there was a time period where I had talks with people who had different beliefs than I did, and I was kind of trying to like change that versus kind of gaining energy from a community maybe of activism, whether that was online or in person, but I didn't really activate that or like tap into that for a long time. So I think that was something that really discouraged me and kind of basically sucked the life out of my activism for a while. But even like, I mean, this is my first time like being in this meeting, but even like reading books like that, and even like tapping into talking to a few people who like are consuming the same media, I think that's something that's really important and that I hadn't really thought about for a long time before I read this book.
I really agree with what you said, especially about like finding community when you're younger and like not living with your parents online, of like kind of what you feel like what you like don't really get from home or from your life. For me, I am from like a really very like super conservative town in the middle of nowhere, and I didn't like have any gay friends or really know any gay people or know what that like really meant at all. And that's definitely something that I like learned about online, and also like found acceptance for online with social media and things that I like would not have had otherwise, and probably would have just kind of kept me closeted otherwise, I feel.
I kind of feel like the things that have pushed me into activism and the things that have pushed me into being, a protester and being involved in groups that are fighting for activism, was a lot of it was taught through online spaces, especially for me personally, the use of podcasts, because I grew up listening to NPR all the time, just on the radio, and then that moved into podcasts, and those really expanded like my views of different topics and gave me a starting point to find like online groups and books and stuff like that. So I think that the many tools that the internet gives us a great way for people to learn about and get themselves involved in activism. However, I do think that there's a lot of problems with the internet and a lot of very negative spaces on the internet, and I think I don't know, like all of us mostly have found the internet to be at least a helpful thing to get to, or most of us have found the internet to be a helpful thing to get us to where we are in terms of like activism and stuff like that, and like of course this space. But I also think there's a lot of people where the internet takes them down a much worse path, and I think almost the internet and social media is primed for a worse path, like in my personal experience, that like there's a lot of rabbit holes that aren't good, and so yeah, I think it's a complex topic, so yeah.
I really agree with that. Sorry. I feel like that was so dramatic. I'm eating right now. But I really wanted to echo that because I feel like as of late, I've had a very complicated relationship with social media. I think that it can make things accessible. Like I find a lot of free PDFs for like very important books and stuff, and like movies and stuff online. or through like social spaces. But at the same time, I think that it can brew like a lot of unhealthy habits and like a lot of, I don't even know how to like articulate it because it is so layered, but it's almost like this. I just really echo you because like the same positives it have can have like equal amount of negatives. And it's just like the whole community building aspect. It's like bad communities can also like build and I'm literally just repeating everything you said, but I don't know.
Nia, that made so much sense. First, second, yeah, totally. Like, I think that was something that like I thought about a lot, like reading about her relationship to technology is because like I have my own issues with social media and like it I hate it most of the time. And I think I listened to I've been talking to some of you about this, but I listened to one of her disability visibility podcast episodes about like art and technology, and they talked a lot about it, and it was super interesting. And I really they mentioned like they talked about like AI and how like social media can kind of like um uphold like certain biases that we like hold in society, and just like with the way that it's structured just continue to like um echo the same like um destructive views that they shouldn't, whether it be like racism or like sexism, and like with AI or like machine learning technology. And the same goes for like disability, and how it is like factored into like social media and technology and machine learning. And but I with that being said, I think that there is like so much room for like growth and transformation in all of these spaces, and I'm almost like excited to see like to keep up with these kinds of things and see how like what are the ways that we can like as like a community be like making social media like a more constructive and like positive space for like the people like around us, how we can be like using it as like a tool for activism, but even just like trying to I think that like even like education can be like really important, like educating people about like those negative like parts of like technology, and like learning together about like how we can like be better. And but it's like absolutely important to like give a I literally don't know what I was gonna say. Anyway, I'll think about it. Somebody else can go, please.
I wrote the article that we just like the most recently published article on the blog, and it was basically about like disability in the arts. And when I was looking for like resources listed at the bottom, we came across a website that's called Alt Text as Poetry, and it's this website it's supported by the Disability Visibility Project. And it's this like really cute website, and they had like music composed for it and everything. But in each of the sections, it's like different resources on how to write alt text, like how to kind of like engage with alt text, different examples. And we linked the website. It's somewhere. Yes. Okay. We're going to send it. But that website is awesome. And I think it's a great example of how like technology and new media related technology can be used for accessibility and like in an educational way, like at the same time. Like this is an expressly educational website, but yeah, I think that it's just so interesting. And I'm also excited to see in the future like what comes up because of it. I'm studying art history, so this is why I am talking about all this. But I'm taking a new media art theory class next semester. And it's basically talking about like AI and digital art and things like that. And I'm so like literally so glad that we read this book right before it, because I feel like it's going to totally change like the course of the class for me and like how I think about things and how I think about the whole class. But I'm excited. I'm really excited for it because of this, like I was anyways, but because of this book particularly. But yeah.
For sure. You guys should definitely check out the Alt Text is Poetry website though, because it's so cool. And just like it's just such an exciting thing to think about, like how accessibility and accessibility like research can be used to evolve the like the things that are like the current states of like the things that are out there. Also on like that podcast coupled with like what she was talking about with alt text is poetry, they talked about like audio description as like a creative practice. And like I think it's just really interesting looking at like these sorts of things like as like forms of art, because they really are like it like, and it just is so exciting. Like definitely check it out. It's super cool.
Also, I think that it's interesting that we've talked about accessibility in like simple terms, but also complex terms. Because like when we were talking about the straw thing, like we basically came to the conclusion that that would have been, there was like a really easy solution there. And a lot of times I feel like there is a really easy solution to make things more accessible, but there are also like, there's AI and all of this technology that's like extremely complex. I don't know anything about AI. Like, I don't know how I would do any of that. But I think it's really interesting that there's solutions everywhere, and then simple solutions can breed complex ones, or honestly the other way around too. But yeah.
Okay, so I would like to shift us into one of my favorite topics that was like in the book, but I feel like culture and food and how they're connected was such a big topic. And I personally loved hearing about, especially like the beginning when she was talking about like her experience with like food, and also even like recently watching it like shift. So she, like I did mention earlier, she did talk a bit about how there were points where either she wasn't able to like eat like solid food, or like the types of food she ate were like kind of like restricted based on what was happening with her like medically. And also there was like a recent article that I read that she did for like is it, I think it's just called The Eater, right? But it was basically like talking about her relationship to like culture and food. So I open the floor for like what caught your guys' attention with that, or just how like food and culture, or like getting to know like yourself and like your own like boundaries and stuff has like come in fruition through like food.
I was gonna say I related a lot to basically everything that Alice wrote, culture, and like even the component of like her medical problems where she was eventually unable to eat solid food, because my brother also experienced a very similar thing, and I'm also culturally like from the same background as her. My parents are from China, and so even like I haven't actually read a lot of work by like intersectional authors recently, but reading even like I've read another book written by an Asian author like also recently, but even reading that and seeing words that I am able to read, the very few words that I'm able to read of Chinese text, or like seeing something that culturally like I've experienced, it's kind of just crazy, like seeing your lived experience written down in a book, especially when it's not like necessarily the, I don't know, the mainstream experience, as in there's not like as many nuances of culture or like intersectionality, where like she really perfectly like explained how important food was to her family and to her culture. And like the part about the interview with her mom where they were talking about what like how food is love, or like basically making people eat and like giving them food is the Chinese way of saying I love you in a lot of ways. And like for example, for my family, like when my brother was eventually like he couldn't eat any more solid food, like that was something that was like sad for like, for example, like my mom, because like in a lot of ways she was like Alice's mom in the book, where like that's kind of how like my parents even now express love. And I think a lot of immigrant parents are that way, where they'll come and like bring you food, or maybe you'll never explicitly be like told I love you or something like Alice was saying, but like food is definitely an indicator of love. And I just really liked how she perfectly encapsulated that and everything she said. The book I just read that I was saying by the Asian American author was Crying in H Mart. So yeah, I just saw Morgan's message.
Yeah, Amy, with what you were just saying about like food, and like parents and stuff, um, I feel like, yeah, food definitely is a place of community almost, especially like families who like eat together. My mom is very dramatic, and every time my brother leaves after visiting us, like whatever meal we have after he leaves, she's always like, I feel really uncomfortable eating right now, like I can't eat, like knowing that like my son hasn't eaten, like I can't tell if my son has eaten or not yet. And I think about it after, and I'm like, that's actually like really sweet, because there are so many ways that we want to like nourish the people that we like care about like very deeply, like whether it's like through like kind words or all those different things, but one of the most like obvious ones is through food. So again, with like what Amy was saying, like my like literally just the other day when I was home, I was like busy like doing some work for Hardcover Hotties, and my dad comes in and gives me like pineapple, and he's just like, here you go. And I like didn't even ask for it, and I like thought about it. I was like, oh, this is one of my favorite parts of being home, just like random fruit. Like it's so fun. And just like in referencing like the book itself, I'm gonna read a little part of it. But I thought this part made me like stop and like think, because I thought it was so sweet. But she was talking about like describing all her favorite foods and like what she liked to eat in like Indianapolis. And she said, okay. Before I had spinal fusion surgery, I wore a fiberglass body brace that kept me upright and pushed my torso into a corseted vice. I would ask my parents to loosen the straps after eating a huge, delicious meal, and it was sweet relief. And then later on, she said, I'm so thankful that my parents never made me feel self-conscious about eating or being a non-compliant patient. I thought that was really interesting, because I had never thought about that. Like the part that I could relate to was like her saying that I'm really thankful my parents that never made me feel self-conscious about eating. Like that was one thing my parents never did. They never made like any types of comments if I grabbed like a plate and literally like loaded it up, even though they knew I wasn't gonna eat all of it. Like where I have seen like my cousins, like my aunt and uncle, I've seen them like call out their kids and being like, why are you serving yourself so much food, and like stuff like that. And just like how impactful like tiny comments like that can be. And also just like, again, ableist. The podcast episode from Disability Visibility that like I listened to while I was reading this book was a one about like fat liberation and talking about like relationships to like food and like how eating disorders can develop and all those things. I just thought it was really great that you can find such like comfort and nourishment through food. And I really liked how that was also emphasized in like the snack manifesto that says like snacking is good, snacking often is better, sharing snacks is a love language, snacks fuel activism. And then this one, snacks aren't inherently unhealthy, eat whatever makes you feel good. And just like a bunch of other ones. But yeah, I love eating, and I always like do feel super appreciative when and like safe whenever I'm in a space where like I'm not thinking like, oh my god, this person like isn't gonna like judge me if I like want seconds or like thirds or stuff like that. Like that again is like another like love language.
I totally agree. And I think that food as a community builder is really, really awesome. And again, the artist that I wrote about makes a lot of, she makes like gelatin sculptures, but she spent a long time making like cakes and like really kind of like crazy, like psychedelic looking, like cakes out of all different kinds of like materials, basically. I mean, all edible materials, but they were like part jelly, part cake, part whatever. There's a lot of different textures, colors, and they were beautiful. But she talked about like her choice to make cakes and like why she chose food. And I forget what the exact quote is, but basically she talked about how food is accessible. And there's also so many different like sensations offered by food. So there's like mouthfeel, there's like the touch, but there's also like scent, there's also taste, there's like sound, there's like so many different sensations that go along with like eating a meal. And just food in general. And I thought that was really interesting that she connected that to accessibility, because that's like one, at least there's like one sensation that everyone can like bond over, you know, or like a conversation can unfold because of like this flavor or the choice to include like this ingredient or something like that. But I thought that was awesome and also really applicable to the book. And I loved the chapter when she was talking to her mom about the new year. That was so fun to read, and it was so fun to like hear her mom hear them talk about the way that they make the dumplings. Because I mean, that's just like always fun, and I love hearing about food anytime, like all day, every day. But my mom makes pierogies every holiday, and she like the way that they were talking about it, that's like exactly how she talks to me about it, because she's so like nitpicky about, she's like, this year I used 2 egg whites, but the year before I only used 1. And it's like all these specific little ingredients, but that's what I talk about with my mom the most, is like food and cooking. So it was awesome to see that in this book. It was just so much fun. I was like, that's literally, yeah, that's so true. But yeah.
I loved also in that interview how she like how they talked about like how food and culture is something that like is meant to be like passed on like generationally, like the and which is like what you were talking about, Lauren, but like the like that's just so it's so like I love hearing like people's food stories. I know that like um my mom's favorite question to like my mom's favorite icebreaker is, what if you were to have a dessert buffet, what would be your 3 desserts? And she's like, I expect people to go in like the most detail, like I want to be there, like I want to like I need the imagery, I need the flavors. I'm like, yes. But another thing that I like thought about like when we were talking about like food as community is back to I think all the time, Bryn, about like at the meeting when we were talking about like the like culture of like gift giving and like how Braiding Sweetgrass talks about that and like the just like receiving like gratefully and like I think a lot about that like with food and especially with like family members and how that is like an act of love and like when my grandma offers to make me food I like can't say no like I'm like I like if even if I'm not going to eat all of it I'm like yes because like I know like how much joy that like it's an act of love in itself to like be receiving of to receive those like kinds of gifts when like somebody you love is like putting so much time and like effort into making something that is gonna like feed and nourish you like Stephanie said but yeah it's that's all. I don't remember what else I was gonna say.
I love hearing all of you guys's stories about like food and stuff, like and family and love and stuff like that. I was thinking about that a lot reading this book. And it also is just something I have been thinking a lot about recently because I never learned how to cook and I'm really trying to get into it like slowly but surely with lots of mistakes along the way. I will not be gifting any of my meals is what I'm saying right now, but we're one day, guys. And I just feel like it's definitely something that like I want to have like moving forward. That's why like I wanted to learn how to cook because like I just feel like there is like so much like love to share surrounding it. So separately from cooking, because that's not really my forte, I do have some really good restaurant recommendations in Columbus that I went to both of these this week with my coworkers because they were like, I want to try new restaurants in Columbus, and I was like, OMG, I can't cook, I will hook you up. And I really love New Taj Mahal on High Street for Indian food. It's the best Indian food in the whole world if you've been there before. And also a restaurant that I hadn't been to yet, but it's also really good, is Lavash or Lavish or Cafe or whatever, also on High Street, like North High. They're like pretty close to each other. It was also really good. And I also just thought about this because Morgan, you mentioned the desserts, and I had the best dessert of my entire life ever at Lavash Cafe. It was like their like chocolate mousse cake. It was the best thing I've ever eaten ever. It was so good.
I remembered what I was gonna say. In regard to like the food as community, my last point was one of my like favorite things. I like love having meals with like friends and just like family. Like I love like sharing like that experience of like eating together. But one thing that I is like so important to me is that we share everything. Like if you get something different than I do, I'm gonna have a bite of your food. And I think that was like something that I like didn't realize until more recently was like instilled in me like because of like just culturally. Like I think that it is it's crazy when I like meet somebody who like doesn't really like practice the same kind of like food sharing meal culture that I do. But then when I like think about it, I'm like, oh, maybe that wasn't something that like their families did like when they were little, but like my like when I like eat at my grandma's house, who's Japanese, she like will make tons and tons of food and like we just all eat it together. It's like in Japan, like people just everything's to be shared, which I think is like really beautiful and has like just really informed how like I eat. And but I think that kind of like goes back to the whole community building thing, and yeah, the art of eating.
I think the cutest thing for me was one time I went out to eat with my friend and her parents, and her parents literally did the cutest thing ever, which I found out they do before every single meal, especially when they're out to eat and they get different things, is they make the other person a bite and give it to them before they eat their meal. It was the cutest thing ever. Like I was like, wow, you guys are like so in love. Wow.
I just have to say it's really beautiful that Morgan and Stephanie both talked about how food is really important in their family and how food can be like passed down through generations, and like food as love, because I'm gonna call you guys out. Stephanie and Morgan like cook for each other all the time, and they always share with everyone else in the house. We're roommates. And it is like the best gift ever, because even if like you're not hungry, like I'll just be like, well, I'll just try a bite of what you're eating because you're offering, and it's like it's just always the best gift, and it makes me feel so loved. Kind of like Stephanie said, how her dad will bring her pineapple when she didn't ask for it. Like I didn't even need a meal, but you guys are offering it to me, and it's so nice.
Since we're doing shout outs, I feel like my relationship with food has been made complicated by my family, but I feel like since being friends with, since Montana, sorry, I try to avoid bringing up Montana, but since Montana, me, Lauren, and Morgan all went farming together, and I feel like that was the first time I started like sharing food, I guess, and like not being weird about it, because I'm kind of a germaphobe. So I feel like that was also like something I had to like overcome. And then just like hearing how excited like they both were with like talking about food and like making meals, like the amount of times I cried about it. It's so ridiculous. But yeah, I think that spaces like that are so important, and I wish that everybody had it, and I wish that like it was more normalized for like all groups of people. But I think that there's like a lot of like societal internalized shit going on. But yeah, I'm grateful for sure.
So, yeah, awesome. Agree with the chat comments. So we are reaching 7 p.m. So are there any like final comments or like reflections, or maybe even like connections to like other things like you've seen or like read recently that like anyone wanted to bring up before we start wrapping up the meeting?
I just wanted to say, can you guys hear me good? Just like a thumbs up. Okay. I just wanted to say, and I know this was like the first thing on the Medium app, but I watched the documentary Crip Camp a couple of years ago, and it was like really good, and I really, really enjoyed it. And so I just recommend that to anyone who hasn't seen it, because it's one of my favorite documentaries. So yeah.
So we're sharing a brain, because did you just see my chat comment? No, I sent it like right when you started speaking. So it's so funny because it's such a good documentary, guys. I really recommend. Like I'll watch it as many times if y'all don't want to watch it alone. It's so good.
I just want to bring up I help organize Sex Week on OSU's campus, and last year we had a speaker named Eva, and they have a website. I can type it. I'll type it. But it's like specifically about disability and sex, and it's really interesting, and that was something that wasn't really brought up during the meeting. But yeah, it's really interesting to like learn about, and I think it's something that doesn't get talked about a lot. So
Yeah, off of that, I think that disability and sex and intimacy is like we could have a whole other meeting on that, frankly. But Andrew Gurza is another disability rights activist who I actually saw at Sex Week my freshman year. And he did a talk on like disability and intimacy and completely like blew my mind. But he has a podcast called Disability in the Dark, which I would totally recommend. Like he just has like a bunch of really, really cool, interesting things to say. And would recommend that. Also, we'll be doing the meeting recap and all of this stuff will be included if you guys forget.
Guys, I had a really good thing that I was gonna say, and I forgot, but you'll see it in the recap if I remember. But there are definitely many good connections that we can circle back to. I'm trying to think so hard for you guys. I think it had something to do with what Nicole was saying. Sex and disability. Okay. How about I think about it for another second?
While you think, Stephanie, I wanted to say Happy New Year to everybody. I hope you guys had a really fun time over break. And if it was not fun, I hope that you have a really good start to your semester then.
Stephanie, did you think of it?
Unfortunately, oh, it just okay. So one of the things I wanted to mention was, so this is also the media map towards the end in like the resources section, but since Invalid, like the organization that just like releases like a bunch of different information, does a little like checklist almost that says basically how do you know if like you qualify as like a disabled person, and it just has all these little like questions, and I thought it was so interesting because I feel like in history and just in everyday interaction there are so many people who have like invisible disabilities that just are never taken into account, including many of the authors we've already read, and just like very prominent like celebrities and like past like people. Like one that I think about all the time, even though okay, I don't love all the presidents in the world, but JFK is always seen as like, oh my God, he's like the best president. He's so handsome, like all this stuff. But he had polio as a child, and it affected like his ability to stand up straight and just like move his body all throughout his life. So during his like presidential campaigns, he had to like do so many accommodations because he wanted to be elected president, but he didn't want anyone to know that he was like struggling with like the after effects of polio, which I thought was like is so interesting because you are taught to like hide and like try to act as like normal as possible in order to be in a space. And even like last year I had a professor who spent like the first class explaining her invisible disability and how it might affect like the way she acts as a professor, and I just like was really taken aback because I had never had like a professor. It's kind of like it seems very off-brand to have like a professor say something so vulnerable, especially like in the beginning, but I really respect that. And also in I think the same one of like the disability visibility podcasts, she starts talking about how one of the only ways to like get able-bodied people like interested in disability justice is to think about, I wish I could remember what the percentage was, but it was a very high percentage of people who like at one point in their lives are going to have some sort of like disability, which is a thing that like you don't think about, but people like break their legs all the time, and all of a sudden that's like the first time they realize like, oh, it's really hard to walk to campus when you have to use like a little like assistant like rolly thing. And yes, maybe it might be like a 3-month period, or like, oh, this person got like eye surgery, so they're gonna go like a week without being able to like see properly. And those are things that like as like long time like able-bodied people like you don't take into account. But I feel like there's just so much that we can learn and like spread from this type of information. Yeah, that was what I was gonna say. But I want to thank everyone for coming, and I like how we talked about like community and like community is love, and the Hardcover Hotties community. Yeah, that's love, big love. We obviously welcome any feedback and are always trying to work towards like accessibility too. So if you guys have anything that any like suggestions with that, we welcome it. Lauren or Ellen, do you guys want to talk about the January book of the month?
Sure. Ellen, do you want to go or try? Or we can both do it.
We could both do it at a drum roll.
Yeah, we should do. Okay. Okay. The January book of the month is The Will to Change
by Bell Hooks.
Yes. It's true. We're reading Bell Hooks again. We read Bell Hooks, All About Love, last January. So we're continuing the theme with The Will to Change. We're really excited about it. I think it's going to be a very awesome meeting. Cannot wait. Like we were talking about it earlier, and like even the media relations are crazy. I don't know if I can say concisely what it's about. So if someone else would like to do that. But yeah, really excited.
I can look up like the description of it.
I believe it's like the second book in her like All About Love series. No.
Okay, so this book is separate from New Visions, but it's one. So the full title is The Will to Change: Men, Masculinity, and Love. And it basically talks about the culture around patriarchy and how that influences like men and the directions that they take. So I thought that it's definitely going to pull from so much of what we talked about in this meeting. I'm already thinking about what Finn said about like how communities, like online communities, can easily take someone from like a positive route into a negative route. I'm thinking incels, but we're about to see so many connections. And yeah, so it's more of like a, if you haven't read anything by Bell Hooks before, she takes like a very accessible plain language principles like approach to relaying like pretty complex like theory, and also just like adds in personal information. I personally haven't read this book yet, but I have read other like works by Bell Hooks, and I'm really excited for this one. Like there's no doubt that she's gonna eat and that we're gonna learn a lot. So recommend it to your friends. This is, oh, okay, you can't see it. But yeah, get it from Bookspace.
And get the men in your life to read this book. All of the men that you know.
Also, our next meeting is going to be Valentine's Day themed, so keep that in mind.
Lastly, before everyone heads out, just want to like open up an invitation for anyone to like write articles for the website. Like, as you guys hopefully have been seeing the article updates, if anyone like is interested in writing anything, like whether it be related to the book or has any like ideas that they'd like to share, please feel free to reach out either via Instagram. We also like have our email, and then on the website, if you go if you have a chance to like look at the website, there is like a book recommendation like form. So you're welcome to put it there as well. But we would love to chat with you. So yeah, we're just come talk to any one of us, and it'd be awesome. Yeah, but past that, thank you guys everyone for coming. It was so nice to see you all. This was such a great book, such a great discussion, and hopefully we'll see you next month to talk about The Will to Change.
See you guys next month.
Yay.
Thank you.
Bye. Good luck this semester, everyone.
Yes.